Online digital spaces have opened up a vast array of opportunities for people from across the world to experience each other's cultures. New ways of being, new ways of thinking, and new ways of behaving are available to billions of people right now. But despite access to a truly global cultural marketplace, some cultures, some peoples remain relatively unknown on the international stage. This problem is particularly acute for Indigenous peoples. Often marginalised or oppressed, there is a great need to hear Indigenous voices, and for outsiders to understand the plurality of challenges which they must face. But despite this, there remains relatively few opportunities for European students to listen to, engage with, and learn from their Indigenous cousins. We believe that the creation of an intercultural dialogue between Indigenous students and European students creates many opportunities in the future for both groups to grow, develop, and to learn. As a result, colleagues from Brazil, Argentina, and the United Kingdom organised a digital learning experience to broaden the international and deepen the intercultural experiences of students in the United Kingdom and Indigenous Kaingang students in southern Brazil. To accomplish this, we created an online teaching space which allowed our students to engage with each other, to interact, and to listen to the stories which each had to share. To paraphrase Roger Ebert, we were trying to build an empathy machine, a place where students from very, very different cultural backgrounds could begin the process of creating a shared dialogue, as well as laying the foundation for future cooperation and understanding. There are many challenges which educators working with Indigenous peoples must overcome. As a result, many strategies have emerged which have a deep respect for Indigenous culture. For example, teaching university-level degrees on Indigenous land. But as successful as that approach can be, it can also create a problem, what my colleagues call educational inbreeding. That is to say, Indigenous students working on Indigenous lands do not always gain the breadth of experience which would assist them in becoming successful outside of their own community context. Considering the need for Indigenous peoples to become leaders outside of their own cultural context, to become policymakers, educators, and cultural mediators, this is a potentially serious issue. Likewise, the educational system in the United Kingdom does not always ensure that university students have an international experience. Whilst many British students certainly do have some form of international experience over the course of their university degrees, various economic and cultural factors ensure that this is far from universal. Even when they do have an international experience, comparatively few British students have contact with cultures or peoples which exist outside of a Western colonialist framework. Direct contact with Indigenous peoples is really quite limited. For this process, we brought together two groups. The first were Indigenous Kaingang students studying at Unoxapago in Santa Catarina, Brazil. The second were British and other European students from Coventry University in the United Kingdom. This group included representatives from Great Britain, France, Spain, and Romania. Academic theories about the nature of intercultural dialogues, such as those by Raoul Fournet Betancourt, informed the intellectual framework of this project. Rather than contributing to the emergence of a global monoculture, the authors of this project instead saw it as an opportunity to contribute to the deepening of cross-cultural understanding and the promotion of cultural equality. To accomplish our goals, we created an online learning space which did not privilege either student group. The Kaingang people have long had to deal with inequity and the denial of equal opportunities, and often the denial of basic respect. Military violence was used against these peoples in the 19th century, and then was succeeded by other social and economic mechanisms which have had a substantial and detrimental impact upon them. Social injustice and economic inequality continue to be serious issues which the Kaingang must face, even in the face of some territorial advancements which have occurred over the course of recent decades. For many of our European students, this equity of respect was completely normal, something to be expected and taken for granted. But for Indigenous students who must face inequity and prejudice in their own country, this framework of equality was an important starting foundation. Mutual and equal respect, and an opportunity for our European students to reflect upon why that was important, was thus built into the foundation of the project. Our European students were briefed before this session. They had already learned about Indigenous histories and racial histories in the context of North America. Now it was necessary for them to learn the basic context that would allow them to understand the histories and cultures of Indigenous South Americans, and in particular, they were taught lessons about the history and culture of the Kaingang people. This was a rare opportunity for our European students to engage with Indigenous peoples and learn from them, firsthand, about their lives and culture. In most instances, European engagement with Indigenous South Americans is limited through engagement with problematic television shows, movies, and other media artifacts. The opportunity to engage with Indigenous South Americans in a space which was built for equals was particularly important. Each of our groups, Indigenous and European, would take turns asking a single question of the other, listening patiently to the response, and writing notes and coming up with new questions in response to the evolving discourse which emerged in this space. Questions were created by both groups prior to the session, allowing each to collaboratively work through their ideas about the other and to develop a strategy to learn as much about their interlocutors as they possibly could. Our European students were particularly interested in learning about Kaingang folklore, about education, and about Indigenous empowerment. Kaingang students, for their part, were particularly keen to understand how outsiders, how Europeans, understood Indigenous Americans, as well as what, if anything, they understood about Kaingangi history and culture. During this session, both groups learned much about the other, not just because of the answers they received to their questions, but sometimes because of the nature of the questions that they themselves were asked. They learned about the common experiences which united Indigenous and Europeans, and they learned about those aspects of their lives, those ways of thinking, being, of behaving, which made each of them unique, special, and valuable. For everyone who took part in this online session, it was an opportunity to engage with people that they might not otherwise have the chance to interact with. It was an opportunity to be heard. It was an opportunity to listen. And it was an opportunity to grow. Equality and respect were fundamental to the design of this project, as was the need for everyone to learn from these interactions. The research paper produced about this project explores these dynamics and their consequences in detail, from both the perspective of our Indigenous students as well as that of our European students.